Welcome and thank you for standing by. I would like to inform all participants that your lines have been placed on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. Today's call is being recorded. If anyone has any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Linda Lee. Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Lee, and I want to welcome everyone to the Exploring Census Data webinar series. This is our fourth installment of the series where we bring you monthly webinars based on popular topics. Our webinars are presented in a format where we include real-life use cases and the opportunity for Q&A at the end of each session. And if you would like to view it again, we offer recordings and transcripts on our site, typically between 5 to 10 business days after the live session. The links on this slide take you to a page where you can learn more and find our archived recordings. But please note we are utilizing technology off-site to continue operations, and we aim to minimize interruptions as much as possible, and we appreciate your patience if we experience any technical delays. Please utilize the chat feature to notify us of issues should any arise, and we will do our best to address and mitigate them. Today's webinar on Innovation at Census Experimental Data Products is the second in our series for this year. And today we have quite a lineup of subject matter experts for you. We have 5 presenters ready to dive into the data to show how census data can be valuable to you. Let's take a quick look at what we will be covering today. I will start off on a high-level overview about the Census Bureau. Then I'll pass the ball over to our first presenter, Ms. Valerie Mostalski. Valerie is a branch chief with experience on our program called the Annual Capital Expenditure Survey. She will be taking you through the experimental data product for the robotic equipment expenditures. Then our next speaker is Ms. Amanda Rosengarth. Amanda is a section chief with experience on the Annual Survey of Manufacturers. Amanda will be covering the experimental component of the Annual Survey of Manufacturers. She will take you on a tour of the industrial robotic equipment data. And from our international trade statistics, we have our statisticians, Ms. Taya Muslik and Mr. Jeremy Sanchez. Together, Taya and Jeremy will dive into new data products from our trade programs and demonstrate the data tools listed here. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Stephen Owens, who is our resident public sector expert. Steve will showcase the latest and greatest data products from the public sector program called the Selected Monthly State Sales Tax Collections. And then we will close out with a Q&A section at the end. The Census Bureau is the federal government's largest of the 17 primary statistical agencies where we conduct over 130 plus surveys each year. Now, listed on this slide are some of our well-known surveys that you may be familiar with. Most people are familiar with the decennial census taking place every 10 years. It is a population and housing count of the United States. Next, the American Community Survey is the annual survey of the nation's population. The Economic Census is our most comprehensive program for business data taking place every 5 years in the years ending in 2 and 7. And the Census of Government is the public sector's counterpart of the Economic Census. Now, in addition to these surveys, there are more than 30 household surveys and over 60 economic programs. When you have a moment, I highly encourage you to check out census.gov to learn more about other surveys that we conduct and the types of data that may interest you. This slide shows the relationship between the frequency of data releases and the level of details. In general, the more timely the data, the less details, with the economic census at the bottom of the pyramid because it takes place every 5 years, and it is the most comprehensive data source when it comes to business data. Now, as you move up the pyramid, the data are released more frequently with less details. Now, today's webinar focuses on experimental data products. What this means is the data products that you will see today are created either using new data sources or methodologies. And we do include quality standards for each of these products, and the specifics can be found in the methodology documents associated with each product. The primary goal of creating these experimental data products is to work towards creating new and regularly occurring statistical products for you. Now, with that being said, the data products that we are featuring today will come from the middle and top tiers of the pyramid. Now, one other thing, in addition to the slides, recording, and transcript of today's material, the experimental data product has its own page on our site. So when you arrive on census.gov, simply type in experimental data products, and you will be presented with a list of search results that includes the main page of these programs. slide shows some key terms that may be helpful for you to know when you're using Census Bureau data. First is the NAICS, which is the North American Industry Classification System that is used to classify each business. Now, a business is classified based on the majority of the business activity. So, for instance, if a business location manufactures a product in the back and has a retail store up front, it can be classified as a manufacturing establishment if over 50% of the activity occurring at that location is manufacturing. Next is the term establishments as opposed to companies and firms. An establishment is a single location. Firms can have multiple establishments under them. So an oversimplified example would be a parent-child relationship where a parent can have multiple children. And finally, Title 13 and 26 are the codes that we abide by. These codes allow us to conduct surveys while protecting privacy and confidentiality. Now, I know I went over everything really fast and on a high level. If you're interested in learning more about any of the content in the overview, please visit census.gov. We have many helpful webinars archived on our site found under Census Academy. And now I would like to turn over the presentation to my colleague, Ms. Valerie Mostofsky.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, my name is Amanda Rosengarth. I'm a survey coordinator for the manufacturing area of the Economic Directorate here at the Census Bureau. So I'm here today to discuss a recently published industrial robotic equipment experimental product that focuses on the presence of robots within manufacturing establishments. Before we get into more details on that product and what that means, I'll start by providing a brief summary of the survey used to collect the industrial robotic equipment data, which is the annual survey of manufacturers. The Annual Survey of Manufacturers, or the ASM, provides national and state-level sample estimates of statistics for all manufacturing establishments with one or more paid employee. It's conducted annually, except for years ending in 2 and 7, at which time the ASM statistics are included in the manufacturing sector of the economic census. The ASM provides statistics on topics such as, but not limited to, employment, payroll, supplemental labor costs, cost of materials consumed, value of shipments, and value added by manufacturing. The links provided on this slide can be used to learn more about the Annual Survey of Manufacturers by accessing ASM data, information about the survey and technical documentation, including previews of the survey questions, reporting instructions, and survey methodology. Back to the reason I'm here today to discuss the Manufacturing Industrial Robotic Equipment Experimental Product. A 3-part special inquiry question focused on industrial robots and robotics equipment was added to the ASM questionnaire beginning in 2018. It was added in an attempt to fill a data gap for the manufacturing plants on how and when robotics contribute to productivity, the conditions under which they complement or substitute for labor, and how they shape regional economy. The 3 parts collect data for the capital expenditures for new and used industrial robotic equipment, the total number of industrial robots in operation at the plant, and the number of robots purchased during the reference year. The first industrial robotic equipment experimental product, published on March 11th of this year, provides data from the 2018 ASM on the presence of robots. The presence of robots is taken to be more broad than just the existence of active robots at an establishment. We treat establishments that have either capital expenditures on robotic equipment, active robots at the plant, or purchases of robots as exposed to robots. So, all 3 data items collected are used to determine an establishment's presence of robots. The robotics tables and figures provide national and state-level estimates of share of plants with robots and share of workers exposed to robots by 2-digit NAICS sector and 3-digit NAICS subsector, as well as plant size distributional statistics. The links provided on this slide can be used to learn more about the industrial robotic equipment experimental product by accessing the data tables and figures, linking to the experimental data products page, and the methodology specific to this data product. So now that I've provided some background information on the data collected and an overview of the publication, let's look at some of the figures published as part of this experimental product. This slide shows a graphic representation for the percent of plants exposed to robots and percent of employees exposed to robots. The percent of plants exposed to robots is defined as the sum of plants with robots divided by the sum of all plants in the group. Similarly, the percent of employees exposed to robots is defined as the sum of employees at plants with robots divided by the sum of all employees at all plants in the group. For both of these figures, the group represented is a 3-digit NAICS subsector. As you can see, the most robot-intensive 3-digit NAICS subsector is 336, Transportation Equipment Manufacturing, with 35% of plants exposed to robots and 60% of employees exposed to robots. This subsector includes, but is not limited to, automobile and light-duty motor vehicle manufacturing, heavy-duty truck manufacturing, and aerospace product and parts manufacturing. The next two most robot-intensive subsectors on both figures are plastics and rubber product manufacturing and primary metal manufacturing. Plastics and rubber product manufacturing includes industries such as plastic bags and pouch manufacturing, plastics pipe and pipe fitting manufacturing, plastics bottle manufacturing, and tire manufacturing. And some examples of what is included in primary metal manufacturing are iron and steel mills, iron and steel pipe and tube manufacturing, and aluminum sheet, plate, and foil manufacturing, to name a few. So now that we've looked at the breakdown of plants with robots and employees exposed to robots by NAICS, let's slice the pie a different way and look at a percent of plants exposed to robots by state. Looking at this figure, we notice that Michigan has the largest percent of plants exposed to robots at the rate of 21%, followed closely by Kentucky and Wisconsin at 19% and 17% respectively. So I'll flip now to another graphic representation of the same data using a map to display the robot intensity. A quick glance at this map, and we can see that plants in states in the Midwest are more likely to adopt robots than plants in the South and the West. And as previously mentioned, Michigan and Kentucky, shown in the darkest blue color, still stand out as the most robot-intensive areas. Moving on, this figure shows the size distribution for robot-adopting plants in green versus those that do not in purple. The plant size categories are a log scale based on number of employees, and the table shows the distribution of plants with or without robots by size category. So for example, the first green bar on the left is saying that out of all the plants in the sample with a presence of robots, 0.7% are in the first size category of 0 to 5 employees. The purple bar next to it is saying that out of all the plants in the sample without a presence of robots, 10.4% are in the same first size category. This figure shows that robot adopters tend to be larger than non-adopters, as exemplified by the right shift in the distribution. However, there's also considerable overlap, meaning there are lots of large plants that do not use robots, and there are a number of small to mid-sized plants that do use robots. This last figure addresses the size distribution of robot adoption, and as with the last figure, the plant size categories for this figure are a log scale based on number of employees. What we see here is the distribution of the share of robot active plants. What this means is factoring in all plants, what share of a given size category have robots. This data tells us that large plants are more likely to use robots, which is not surprising. 49% of the largest manufacturing plants, or plants with 1,000 or more employees, use robots in their production process. We can note here as well that robot use among the smallest size class is rare. The Industrial Robotic Equipment Special Inquiry continues to be collected on the ASM questionnaire, and we're currently working on future experimental data products related to this data, continuing with the presence of robots data for the 2019 survey year, and also analyzing the robotics capital expenditures data further for both 2018 and 2019. No dates have been set for these upcoming experimental products at this time, but hopefully more to come, as we believe it will be interesting to see how this data evolves over time. So now I'll pass it to Tia and Jeremy.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
I will be talking to you a little bit about USA Trade Online. First things first, what is USA Trade Online? USA Trade Online is an online database that is free and open to the public. It provides current and cumulative U.S. export and import data at the goods or commodity level. It is updated monthly, and some users of USA Trade Online include manufacturers and other businesses. So, for example, if a U.S.-based business is interested in expanding abroad, they can take a look at our data and identify potential export markets. Or if they're interested in importing goods into the United States, they can take a look at our data and see where they can import the goods from potentially. And then we also have economists who use our data, governments and federal agencies, and then anyone who is interested in international trade data. So previously, USA Trade Online used to be a paid subscription service. However, recently, we had made it an open data source because we wanted to expand our user base and make access to data more easy. So we have made it a free, as a free database. So anyone interested in our data can create a free account and access the data for free. Where does our import and export data come from? Well, all importers and exporters have to fill out forms and file them with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Over 95% of those forms are filed over the internet, and then less than 5% are filed as paper forms and mailed in. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection compiles all of that data and sends it over to the U.S. Census Bureau, more specifically to the Economic Indicators Division, and then eventually we publish all of that data in USA Trade Online. What data exactly is available in USA Trade Online? USA Trade Online import and export data can be filtered based on the following criteria. You can take a look at it by commodity. So for example, if you're interested in looking at imports and exports of shoes or sunglasses or agricultural products, you can select different commodities. They're tied to 8 harmonized system codes as well as NAICS codes. And then you can take a look at the data. You can look at the dollar value of the good. You can look at the quantity, unit value, air vessel, dollar value, and shipping weight as well. You can break it down by country, by geographic region, trade agreement, and or international organization. You can look at state of origin, like where we export, which states we export goods from, and then which states import certain goods. And then you can break it down by district, by port, and of course, selecting the time period for which you're interested is pretty important too. We publish our data on a monthly basis. However, you can also take a look at annual data, year-to-date data. You can actually also do quarterly calculations as well. USA Trade Online commodities. Commodities are available under the classification of the Harmonized System and NAICS system. There are more than 17,000 import commodity codes and more than 9,000 export commodity codes. So the Harmonized System provides the most detailed international trade data at the HS 10-digit level. So for example, if you're interested in looking imports and exports of different types of shoes, shoes made from leather versus non-leather, I think that at the HS 10-digit level, you should be able to find it. And then we also have data in there, like I stated, on the NAICS code, which is industry-based. These are some of the examples of what you can pull from USA Trade Online. You can look at the top import ports, the top exporting ports, districts, or states. You can look at the top commodities that we import and export. You can also look at top states that import and export certain type of good. You can look at our imports and exports to different countries. You can pull up our top trade partners in terms of exports as well as imports. There's all sorts of different filters that you can apply and look at the data from so many different angles. And this is a screenshot of what USA Trade Online looks like. Like I stated earlier, it is completely free and available to everyone, although you do need to sign up for an account. You simply just go to usatrade.census.gov and click on the Sign Up Now button. All right, so that's a wrap on USA Trade Online. I'll pass it over to Jeremy Sanchez from my team, who'll talk about another international trade data tool called the Global Market Finder.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Sanchez. I work with TIA, and today I'm going to be talking about the Global Market Finder, which is an interactive tool for U.S. exporters. And I think the Global Market Finder is a really good complement to USA Trade Online, which is has a ton of data and is very dense. But what the Global Market Finder has, and it's designed for new exporters or exporters who want to expand their market, is that you get that detailed data, just like T was talking about, those 9,000 export commodities, but instead of having it in USA Trade Online, you can have it in a visual tool, which allows a lot of visual information. So new in this new version of Global Market Finder, which itself is actually still pretty recent, is that we have integrated our Schedule B search, so you can search for those detailed commodities within the tool itself using a plain language type of search engine, and it will give you the code that you can feed right into there. And once you feed it in there, you get annual data by country for the last 5 complete years, so 2016 to 2020. And these are 4 different visualizations that tell the story at a glance. So just looking at this one, the map, it shows you the top 5 markets, and these are all interactive, so you can hover over them and see the value for whatever year you select, and as well as the quantity. There's also this time series, and one important thing is you can see with these exports of fishing rods, you can see the trends, and not only can you see this data visually, for each of our graphs we have an equivalent table, so you can see the data that you see on screen in this graph. One of my favorite graphs that we have is this unit price graph. And what that does is it allows you to see where the pricing is, and you might be able to tailor your schedule for there. So you can see that some of these dots, which represent individual countries, are below sort of the average line. And so maybe if you're trying to export a less premium product or something at a lower price point, then maybe that's a good place to go. And if you're trying to export something maybe that's more premium, a higher price point, you can find good markets for that as well. We also have the data by method of transportation, so you can see how these things are being exported to the country. And somewhat coincidentally, air is the method of preference for the last few years for fishing rods, so not by boat. And so that's just a brief overview of the Global Market Finder. If you're interested, you can just simply search Census Global Market Finder on Google, and you should be able to find it. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Stephen Owen, and take it from there.
Okay, thanks everybody. My name is Steve Owens. I'm with the Census Governments Program. We are basically the 3rd census for the Census Bureau. The other 2 being the population census, which has been in the news lately, and the economic census. And basically what we do is we collect data on state and local government financial and employment activity. Back when the pandemic started last March, it's hard to believe it's been over a year now, but it has, our associate director put out a call for data products related to the pandemic. And in my area, the most current surveys that we have are a couple of quarterly surveys, one on pensions and one on taxes. The problem is that by the time we felt that, a lot of people when the pandemic started didn't think it was going to last that long. We figured we'd get a couple waves and it would be over by the summer. If we only knew then what we know now. So we didn't feel the quarterly data would be timely enough, and we didn't feel the quarterly data would measure some of the intricacies that were happening, more or less on the fly. And one of the things we had noticed with our quarterly tax data is that a lot of respondents were giving us monthly tax data. So we thought, hey, if we could get data on a monthly basis, we could better measure the effects of the pandemic. And this is where the Experimental Data Products Program really was a savior. Because normally, in order to do that, you'd have to stand up a traditional survey, you'd have to get OMB approval, you'd have to do your design, your collection, et cetera. It would have taken months, if not a year or more, to get that off the ground. But the experimental data product allowed us a lot more flexibility, and so what we did with this was when we saw that states were giving us monthly data, we said, hey, let's go out and see what they've got on their websites. And sure enough, there was a wealth of data out on the state websites. And I will show you where to actually get that information. And then we said, okay, so what types of taxes would be meaningful for the pandemic? Well, we threw income tax out the window straight away because the federal government had extended the deadline to July, and doing comparisons would be to the prior year would be kind of meaningless. So we finally came up with sales taxes thinking that it could be, and we never tested this theory, it could be a proxy for actual sales. And so maybe that would allow us to track some of the effects of the pandemic on sort of a monthly basis. We started this product with 5 specific sales taxes. One, the general sales tax, which is the basic percentage you pay on all goods in most states. 2, gas taxes, motor fuel taxes. 3, the tobacco, cigarette taxes. We added a category for lodging taxes, which I'll get into in a minute, and then alcoholic beverage taxes. We are planning on adding corporate and individual income taxes to this product in the fairly near future, at which point the title is obviously going to change. That's probably a couple of months away at this point. The data themselves go back to March of 2019, which is the year before the pandemic started. And we're keeping that current. We generally release revisions in the new data the 3rd Friday of every month, so look for that next week, at the end of next week, where we'll have the most updated data. I mentioned the data sources. This file actually contains the websites which we're able to get the data from the states, so I would say not only do they have the data that we're using for this product up there, but if you're interested in tax data and you're a tax geek like I am, you'll find a lot more on some of those websites. So it's definitely worth checking out. And I'll also mention that we're in the process of automating some of this collection through web scraping and other techniques. So hopefully we can actually, sometime in the not-too-distant future, push up the release dates of some of these data and make them a little bit more timely. And, of course, the methodology. What we did, we modeled our tax categories off our current quarterly tax survey, and you'll see that in the methodology. I'm about to show you some slides from the visualization itself. Now, the visualization is actually interactive, and you're welcome to go to that and kind of play around with it. You get month-to-month comparisons. What I did for the purpose of this presentation was I took some key points in time for various taxes, and I'll kind of show you as I go through. What we did with the visualization was we did a month-over-year comparison. So, in other words, we're comparing March of 2020 to March of 2019. And you know, you might say, well, why don't you just do the prior month? Why don't you just take March of 2020 and compare it to February of 2020? Well, there are actually 3 reasons for that. One are tax collection cycles. If you look at something like the income tax, you expect states to be collecting a lot more income tax in April around the deadline, or when the deadline used to be, than they would be, say, in December or the middle of winter. So that kind of would skew the data. Another one is seasonality. You take a state like Florida, for example, which relies on the tourist industry and relies on their sales tax. You would generally see different spikes from consecutive months because of that. And the third one is just the sheer number of days in a month. If you were to take March, and since we're talking sales data here, if you take March and compare it to February, well, you've got 3 more days worth of sales in March, and that's over 10% right there. So doing the month over year makes a lot more sense. And as I show you these slides, you'll see what I mean. One thing I want to mention is that the tax, a lot of this tax data is sensitive to things like rate changes or collection cycle changes. So where you see large changes in some states, oftentimes it's not really a reflection of the actual tax or the tax base, like the amount of sales, but it's often a reflection of they've changed the rate or they've changed when they actually collect the tax, et cetera. What you would normally see with a graph like this in normal times are a lot of light shadings. So the way this key works is the darker shadings are the biggest increases and decreases, and the lighter shadings are the the small ones. And in normal circumstances, you generally see very light shading one way or the other. But I'm about to show you what happened during the pandemic. So let's look at this first slide. This slide represents general sales tax collections based on the accrual month of March. So the states actually collect these taxes in the following months. So the merchants, you go to your corner 7-Eleven, you buy something in March. that tax actually isn't paid by 7-Eleven to the state until April. But in order to avoid confusion and put this in context, I've taken the accrual month, which is when the tax was initially incurred when that purchase was made, and this better lines up with actual sales numbers. So if we look at March, we see some interesting things here. If you think about March of last year and where the pandemic really hit hard initially, states like New York and Florida come to mind, and those states were started to go into much earlier lockdown mode than the rest of the nation. And you look out in some of the plain states in the Midwest, they were actually still seeing positive growth because the virus really hadn't hit them yet, and it was kind of business as usual. But then let's go to and I warn you, this is one of those things that if you're queasy, you may want to turn your head. But let's look at what happened in April. And when I go to this slide, keep in mind that April was basically the lockdown month. So let's look at what happened to sales taxes. Okay, this is unprecedented. You see sales taxes down markedly across everywhere in the nation. I'll mention that the 5 states in gray are states that don't have general sales taxes, but everywhere else where we can measure it, everything's down at least slightly, and in most cases fairly markedly. What this did was set off a panic with the states themselves, and the states were saying, oh my God, this is going to be the new normal for a while. We need to redo our budget projections for next year based on this potential, what we're seeing in the loss of revenue in April. Most states have their new fiscal year starting in July, so states were really taking their revenue projections and their budgets downward because of that. Now let's take a look at May, and you see that things, with a couple of exceptions, things are recovering fairly nicely, and we're out of the lockdown. Things are opening up. The first wave is, somewhat dying out. Things are somewhat returning to normal, and plus, a lot of people are starting to buy things online, and so sales are kind of picking up in that month. And if you go to January of this year, you see further recovery in most states. You look at a state like Maryland, well, that's really an exception because they enacted a Recovery Act of their own, which gave sales tax payers a one-time tax credit and delayed their taxes. And those are the types of anomalies I'm talking about. But in general, you see the nation doing a lot better. And as a result of this, a lot of states are running some nice surpluses this year because they based their dire budget projections on last April, and as we see, that didn't really pan out. Now let's take a look at lodging taxes. And lodging taxes are mainly a local tax. There are only 20 states that actually collect a statewide lodging tax. And this is not a standard category for the census governments. This is something we came up with just for this product because we felt it would be interesting to track the lodging industry over the pandemic. So this is April. Everything's in lockdown. You can see things down across the board except for Montana. If you were trying to flee a pandemic, where's the first place you would go? Montana. And it turns out that Montana actually is experiencing a huge real estate boom as people are going out, buying second homes, fleeing the pandemic, working remotely, et cetera, whereas everywhere else is just totally depressed, which is, air travel's halted, people aren't driving anywhere, they're staying home, not surprising. Let's look at the height of the summer travel season. You're not seeing really much recovery. Some states are doing a little better, but compared to the prior year, still at this point, air travel's down, nobody's really taking, summer vacations, everybody's taking staycations. And even if we go into the Christmas season this year where people would be normally traveling, again, with the exception of Montana and somewhat Idaho, which I understand is undergoing a similar type of real estate boom, you're really not seeing much recovery. This is going to be an interesting one to watch in the coming months. As the vaccinations roll out there, it comes down to when is the lodging industry going to recover. I know the TSA numbers are up on air travel, et cetera, so we will see if this summer proves out to be the actual recovery for that industry. Now let's take a look at motor fuel. In April, things are on lockdown and nobody's driving, everybody's remotely working or not working at all. You see a couple of exceptions. Illinois had actually doubled their gas tax, which is why you see an increase. What I'll mention with the interactive visualizations is you can mouse over any of these states and see the actual percentage increase. So if I were to mouse over Illinois on the interactive screen, you would see an increase of about 50%. But they increased their tax rate 100%, so actually the 50% gain is an actual loss. In Ohio is similar. They increased their gas tax substantially as well. If we go into July, which, again, is the height of the summer driving season, you're not seeing that much recovery there. And again, a lot of these anomalies that you do see are generally for gas tax changes. Now, what I will tell you is there is an underlying story that you don't see here and you won't see in the data. And that story is that a lot of states divide their gas tax into three categories. They have the general gasoline tax, which you and I pay at the pump. They have a diesel fuel tax, which is mostly for the trucking industry, and then they have an aeronautical fuel tax for the airline industry. And what we saw in assembling the underlying data for this is that both the gasoline and the aeronautical tax tended to be down just, universally in all states, whereas diesel fuel tended to be up. So basically what I'm saying is these numbers would be even worse if not for the trucking industry, the increased, volume from people ordering online, et cetera, and that sort of thing. And if we flash forward to January, again, not much recovery. Driving still down, et cetera. It's going to be interesting to take a look at the May numbers when they come out with what's happening with this pipeline hack. You'll probably start seeing some regional things in the Southeast where, you're going to start seeing, because some states index their fuel tax to gas prices, you're going to start seeing some artificial increases there. One thing I'll mention back in April of last year with the fuel is that the price of oil was also tanking at the time, and for those states that base their tax partially on the price of gas, they were taking kind of a double bath because not only was consumption down, but the price was down as well. And some states have actually scrambled to reform their tax codes to take care of that situation. And then the last tax I'm going to show you is kind of a study in human behavior, the alcoholic beverage tax. One of the things that the biggest stories on the news back last March was not only the increase in grocery sales, but people thought they were going to be locked down for a while, so what do? You go out and buy as much booze as you can get because you don't know when you're going to be able to buy booze again. And what you see here is a lot of green, a lot of increase in the alcohol tax, but you do see a few exceptions, and part of that is understanding the tax structure in individual states. If you take a look at the state of Texas, they not only have a tax on retail alcohol sales, but they also have a large reliance on bar and restaurant sales for alcohol. So you close the bars and restaurants, what's going to happen? And sure enough, in states like that, you get an actual drop-off in taxes. And then if you go to April, people have bought their alcohol. It's kind of a mixed bag and things. Those stores really never closed during the pandemic, so things start to return to normal. We don't know exactly where this is going to go. This started out as, just kind of what can we do to track the pandemic. But I think the real value are going to be in the data over time, not just during the pandemic, but also at other times, and that's to be seen. And I also wanted to mention we do have some related programs to this where you can get more comprehensive and a much longer time series of tax data. We do an annual state government tax collection survey. In fact, we just released the 2020 numbers last month. We do our quarterly tax revenue survey. We should have the first quarter of 2021 out sometime later this month or early next month. And then our state and local government finances, this is where you can actually get the local taxes as well as just the state taxes that I've presented. And now I will turn this back over to Linda.
Yes, hi, this is Linda. Valerie has joined us, and let's give the ball over to Valerie.
Today I'd like to share with you the results of a new data item that was added to the 2018 Annual Capital Expenditure Survey that resulted in our release of an experimental data product. But before I do that, permit me to provide you with a brief overview of the Annual Capital Expenditures Survey. The annual data provide estimates of capital investment in new and used buildings and other structures, machinery, and equipment by all private non-farm businesses in the U.S. The Annual Capital Expenditure Survey is a sample survey of approximately 70,000 companies, consisting of 50,000 companies with employees and 20,000 companies without employees. The annual capital investment data for employer businesses are collected at the company or firm level. The data are published at the national level and tabulated based on the 2012 North American Industry Classification System at the 2-digit and select 3- and 4-digit NAICS levels. The survey covers 19 NAICS major industry sectors and 132 NAICS industries. To access the ACES published estimates, you can use the link provided on this slide. You will find data tables, charts, and visualizations, as well as a summary of the findings. Capital expenditures for robotic equipment were collected for the first time on the 2018 survey to fill a data gap in response to growing interest and high demand by researchers, congressional members, and others on measuring robotics as part of official government statistics, specifically measures of robot adoption intensity and the impact on employment and productivity. In order to be responsive to this request, our strategy was to collect capital expenditures for both industrial and service robotic equipment from our employer businesses in a single question. The question included a list of the tasks performed by both industrial and service robots and a remarks box that we asked the businesses to use to describe the types of robotic equipment the company purchased in 2018. We sent an advance notice to the large employer businesses in our 2017 survey to give them time to prepare for this new data request. The capital expenditures for robotic equipment were collected from employer businesses at the company level and assigned to the company's sampled NAICS, in other words, their primary business activity, which is based on payroll. This is unlike the Annual Capital Expenditure Survey published estimates, in which companies are asked to report for all industries in which they operate and have capital expenditures for structures and equipment. Given this was the first year we were collecting the robotic equipment expenditures, the results were released as an experimental data product. Our intention moving forward is to publish the estimates annually in conjunction with the ACES report. To access the 2018 robotic equipment expenditures data released on September 30th of last year, you can use the link provided on this slide, where you will find data tables, charts, and visualizations. The data provide national level estimates by 2-digit NAICS sector and select 3-digit and 4-digit NAICS industries. And now that I've provided an overview of the ACES program and survey methodology, as well as the methodology used to collect the robotic equipment expenditures, let's take a look at the results. This table provides estimates of capital expenditures for robotic equipment by major industry sector. Overall, robotic equipment expenditures in 2018 totaled $6,472.2 million and accounted for 0.6% of total equipment expenditures. In 2018, 4 sectors, manufacturing, retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, and wholesale trade, accounted for 91.8% of all robotic equipment expenditures. Investment in robotic equipment in 2018 was not as prevalent in some business sectors. The manufacturing sector accounted for the largest share of all robotic equipment expenditures. The share was 66%, followed by retail trade at 14.2%, healthcare and social assistance at 8.7%, and wholesale trade at 2.9%. These are the industries with the largest capital expenditures for robotic equipment. 28 of the 132 industries in scope to the Annual Capital Expenditure Survey accounted for 87.1% of all robotic expenditures. 6 industries in the manufacturing sector: motor vehicle, body, trailer, and parts manufacturing, food manufacturing, fabricated metal product manufacturing, semiconductor and other electronic component manufacturing, plastics and rubber products manufacturing, and industrial metalworking and general purpose manufacturing, invested $3,116.5 million in robotic equipment and accounted for 73% of spending for robotics in the manufacturing sector. In addition to the manufacturing sector, non-store retailers and general merchandise stores accounted for $723.1 million, or 78.4% of spending in the retail trade sector. General medical and surgical hospitals invested $412.2 million in robotic equipment and accounted for 73.4% of total spending in the healthcare and social assistance sector. Merchant wholesalers of durable goods spent $114 million for robotic equipment in 2018 and accounted for 60% of total spending in the wholesale trade sector. Some of our overall findings were that the majority of our respondents were able to answer the robotic expenditures question, reporting either 0 or a positive value. We also found that collecting the types of industrial and service robotic equipment that was purchased was invaluable to ensure data quality. The Census Bureau continued to collect robotic equipment expenditures in a single question on the 2019 survey. Our plans are to release the results this summer as an experimental data product as well. This year, beginning with the 2020 survey, rather than associate the robotic equipment expenditures with the business's sampled NAICS or their primary business activity based on payroll, we are collecting the expenditures at the industry level, as we do with the total new and used equipment expenditures for our ACES published estimate. We are also collecting the presence of robotic equipment by industry segment for 2020. This concludes my presentation today.
Thank you, Valerie, Amanda, Taya, Jeremy, and Steve, for the wonderful presentation of the topic and the demonstration of how to access the data. Thank you, everyone, for your interest in our data and for attending today's webinar. Before we begin the Q&A section, Anthony, could you please pass the, oh, sorry, that's my fault. I am trying to share my screen for this slide. Okay, so this should be the slide. Okay. So before we begin our Q&A, please take note of the contact information listed on this slide. We have information for our data dissemination specialists, and this is for anyone who may be interested in hands-on, in-person training. We have specialists assigned by geography that will be able to provide this service. As a reminder, we're focusing our Q&A on today's topic, and we'll be accepting questions related to today's topic. And if you have questions related to other topics, please feel free to send an email to us at census.askdata@census.gov. And now we'd like to open up the phone lines for Q&A portion of this session. Let's check in with our operator. Operator, at this time, do we have questions in the queue?
Thank you. We will now begin our question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name slowly and clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. Again, that's *1 if you would like to ask a question. One moment, please.
While we are waiting for the operator to queue up our questions, I want to mention that if you haven't already seen it, we have a COVID-19 data hub that pulls together census data on the pandemic in one central location. And if you go to our site, you'll be able to access information on how the COVID-19 has affected businesses and households alike. Let's check in with our operator again.
Thank you. At this time, we have no, we did just have one question come through. One moment.
That question is coming from
Joyce.
Joyce.
Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I think you addressed it, but I was attending because I was looking for contact information for someone to speak to our organization about how to better use census data in our area where we're trying to address some questions. And it looks like the last slide was exactly that. Is that the contact information I should use if I'm trying to reach a census partner to talk to us about how we could leverage the data?
Yes, you are absolutely right. So you can go ahead and send an email or call us at this number, and we will determine which office would be best for the type of information you're looking for, and you can connect that way. So please feel free, go ahead and send us the question.
Thank you so much. That was my question.
You're welcome. Do we have any other questions?
Still no questions at this time, but as a reminder, you may press *1 on your telephone keypad.
Okay, so while we're waiting, let's read some questions off the chat. We do have several questions here, and I have two questions for you, Tia. It's on trade data. The first question is, will the trade data be mapped on the NAICS code to the NAICS code?
Yes. So we do have current plans to include NAICS in our data products in the near future. We're still working on that. I don't have the exact date on when that will be made available, but it is something that we are working towards.
Sounds good. Thank you. And our second question for you, Tia, is the data of the USA Trade Online exactly matched to that of the UN Comtrade?
Yes, it is. You may be surprised, but the data that UN Comtrade publishes is actually our data. We send them our data, and they publish it as well on their UN Comtrade database.
Thank you, Tia. Amanda, we also have a question for you on the ASM. Will the ASM data be released at the detailed NAICS code or just at the broad?
Hey, Linda, the ASM data is collected and released just at the broad line level, so not the detailed line.
Thanks, Amanda. Steve, we have two questions for you. Tracking pandemic economic impact by following sales tax collection is a great idea, but what about confounding factors such as varying and changing tax rates as well as delayed payments?
Yeah, so really kind of the devil is in the details, and you know, a monthly can only go so far, and I would recommend, you know, looking at both our quarterly and our annual products to see where that smooths out. You know, if you see something in a given month that looks out of kilter, chances are it's probably going to normalize itself over a quarter or over the course of a year.
Thanks, Steve. Let's take one more question for Steve before we check back in with our operator. So, Steve, can the sales tax data be obtained at the county level?
A lot of states do publish sales tax at the county level. You know, your best bet is to look at the document where we have the sources for our data up there, because oftentimes they'll lead to a lot of states do tax research on their county level data. Not only do they have county level data of sales taxes, but they often have sales tax data by industry as well. But it's really hit or miss, but the data are out there in some instances.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. Let's check in back with our operator. Operator, do we have additional questions?
You do. The next one is coming from Ruth Dickinson. Your line is open.
Thank you. My question would probably be answered by Valerie. You said that there were 70,000 companies and industries that were surveyed for your data product. I'm curious what portion of the population that was. How many total companies and industries do we have in the United States?
I'm not sure that I can speak to the total number of industries, only what is in scope to the annual capital expenditure survey. And because this is a sample survey, it was a total of 50,000 employer businesses that we asked these questions of.
maybe I'm not wording the question very well. You can reword it to get to the point I'm trying to drive at, which is if 50,000 with employees and 20,000 businesses without employees were surveyed, and that was a statistical sampling of the total population, what is your goal? What portion of the company and industry population are you trying to sample? And then related to that, of the 70,000 that were sampled, what was your response rate?
Okay. Overall, the survey has about an 80% response rate. And I believe it was about 80% for the employer businesses. The number of businesses that we're trying to cover overall, I want to say, and I don't know that number, I do apologize.
So it looks like you can always send your question through my office with the information available here, and we can forward the message directly to Valerie's area. Some of these questions require research, so sometimes we can't always have the answer right away without looking it up. Operator, do we have another question?
Still no questions in queue at this time, but as a reminder, you may press star 1 on your telephone keypad. And one moment for the next question.
Okay. Do we have additional chat? I can't open this up right now. Okay, so don't see additional chat questions. So let's give it a few seconds, and if we do not have additional questions, we can wrap this up. Okay, at this moment, I would like to express our thanks to everyone again for attending today's webinar. Again, if you have questions that we are unable to address, please feel free to send the information and the question to the email you see listed here, or call the number, and we will get back to you with the response and connect you with our subject matter experts. This concludes today's presentation. Have a great day.